Hey there, self-care warriors. Welcome back to Self-Care. Hey, today I'm going to be starting a new video series based on a written series that I did, a 5-part series on daughters of narcissistic fathers that I wrote and published back in 2017 on Psych Central, and I never got a chance to actually do a video series on it. This was a 5-part series that I published on Psych Central back in 2017, I believe May 2017, and a lot of the themes and topics that I covered there seem to resonate with children of narcissists on a very deep level. So I really want to share it here as a video series. I'm going to be putting up 5 different videos that cover each part. And each part of this series covers a perspective about daughters of narcissistic fathers, as well as steps to heal that aspect of that journey to healing. Now, you may be wondering, why am I focusing on daughters of narcissistic fathers? Why not daughters of narcissistic mothers? Why not sons of narcissistic fathers or sons of narcissistic mothers? I know that a lot of you have experienced narcissistic mothers or fathers, and this is not a video to invalidate those experiences. A lot of what you'll see in this video series, as well as my written series, can resonate with everyone, but I do want to focus on the daddy-daughter relationship simply because I know it better from many different perspectives, which I won't go into here, but just know that this is a topic that deeply personally resonates with me, and that's why I chose to focus on this lens. I also think that being specific about the certain relationship allows me to go into more of the sociocultural differences, because young women who are growing up with this male role model, as well as being objectified in society, there's a lot of different factors at work here that are a little bit different than perhaps maybe a son and narcissistic mother relationship. So having that specific perspective also allows me to go into the nuances of this kind of dynamic. It doesn't mean that any other kind of narcissistic parent-child relationship is any less harmful. They're all harmful in their own ways. And a lot of what you'll get in this series is actually going to resonate with all of you, regardless of what gender you are or the gender of your narcissistic parent. So I hope you find this useful, and let's get started on part 1 of this series. I'm going to read out loud the first part of the series, and it's not going to include everything. Obviously, this is a 5-part series, and I go into a lot in this series, but I am going to leave links so you can read the entire series if that's what you want to do. And the first part of the series is about how daughters of narcissistic fathers can cope. It's an introduction. Those who have had a narcissistic parent can testify how damaging it can be to one's psyche. Narcissistic parents lack empathy, show a severe sense of entitlement, and they micromanage the lives of their children. They may even subject their children to neglect, as well as emotional and/or physical abuse. Daughters of narcissistic fathers face all of the common challenges of having an unempathic, cruel, and abusive parent. But along with these, they may also encounter unique triggers and obstacles on the path to their healing journey. Here are 5 common challenges daughters of narcissistic fathers experience, and tips on how to overcome them on the healing journey. Sons of narcissistic fathers may also be able to relate to these, as well as daughters of narcissistic mothers and sons of narcissistic mothers as well. Part 1. The grandiose self-image and reputation of their fathers rarely matched the coldness and indifference behind closed doors, habituating their children to accept interpersonal danger as the norm. Narcissists are masters of impression management, and the charismatic narcissistic father is no different. As the daughter of a narcissistic father, you may have noticed that your father prioritizes reputation in the community above the happiness or well-being of you and your family members. Your father was most likely known as generous, friendly, and exceptionally charming to all those who knew him in public. Yet behind closed doors, he was verbally, emotionally, and/or physically abusive to his spouse and children. This is not uncommon in households with a narcissistic parent. The false self of the parent is rarely a match for the true self within the realm of the family unit. As a result, daughters of narcissistic fathers are likely to have been silenced should they have ever attempted to speak out against the abuse or spoken ill of the father within the household or in public. Combined with gender roles and expectations for young women to be quiet, demure, and polite, even to dangerous people, daughters of narcissistic fathers may have been conditioned to adapt to danger rather than to protect themselves from it. That is why dangerous situations and people with a Jekyll and Hyde personality, people who are rarely consistent in their character or integrity, feel like an oddly familiar, unsafe comfort zone to daughters of narcissistic fathers in adulthood. So remember, trauma expert Judith Herman talks about how survivors of complex trauma often are in a repeated search for a rescuer, right? So when daughters of narcissistic fathers are conditioned to this kind of dangerous personality in childhood, what happens when they seek that savior in adulthood? All they find are narcissists that are disguised as their saviors. So they tend to be re-traumatized in adulthood. Part 3 of this series actually talks more about daughters of narcissistic fathers tend to gravitate towards narcissistic men in adulthood. So I'll explore that in part 3 as well. What to do? This is the section of the blog where I talk about the steps towards healing after I cover whatever I've emphasized in the part in the section that I'm talking about. Validate and acknowledge the experiences you had with your narcissistic parent, and don't allow the opinions of others to detract from the reality of the abuse you experienced. It is common for survivors of any form of abuse to doubt and question themselves about the horrific violations they experienced. This is especially true when their abuser is a loved figure in the community or projects a charitable and loving image to the outside world. Daughters of narcissistic fathers have also experienced an enormous amount of gaslighting from their abusers, as well as enabling by their family members or friends of the family. You know, because they love the narcissistic father, they think that he's great because he's projected that image to the world. Survivors of narcissistic abuse tend to gaslight themselves into believing their experiences were not valid due to the reputation of their abusers. If the abuse is taking a severe toll on your mental health and well-being, consider limiting contact with your narcissistic parent to only holidays and special occasions. Limited contact enables you to take your power back, as you can control the frequency with which you interact with the parent, and you can walk away from potentially threatening situations before they escalate. Some survivors find that their particular situation warrants going no contact with their abusive parents. If that is the case, know that you do not have to feel guilty or ashamed. You have every right to protect yourself from dangerous predators, even if they share your DNA. Learn constructive ways to self-validate. Journal or speak with a trauma-informed counselor about the abuse you endured to reconnect with its reality. Preferably a counselor who knows about narcissistic personalities, right? Confer with validating family members or friends who are also recipients of the abuse, and do not minimize or deny it, right? That's really important. If you have other members in your family or friends of the family that actually do see the abusive character of your father, then it might be a good idea to connect with them on that front. Honor what you experience and recognize that you do not deserve it in any shape, way, or form. Step number 2, find ways to give yourself the emotional nourishment you needed but didn't receive in childhood. Reparent yourself, and this is a concept that Pete Walker, trauma therapist Pete Walker, talks about, and I'll leave a link to his blog below in the description too. Reparent yourself with the soothing words, actions, as well as acts of radical self-care that can combat some of the destructive conditioning you may have faced in your childhood. Connect with your inner child through visualization, soothing visualizations of course, meditation, and self-soothing whenever you're in an emotionally distressing state. We will talk more about specific healing modalities in part 3 of this series. Step number 3. Identify and consider limiting contact with any people you currently have in your life who also have a false self that do not align with their true selves. Often when we've been raised by a father figure like this, we tend to gravitate towards people who feed us empty words and false promises, or those who are emotionally unavailable, or worse, even narcissistic themselves. No wonder our early role models for relationships also lacked emotional depth and an inability to connect with us emotionally. As a result, we can become tone deaf to verbal and emotional abuse throughout our lives as we establish relationships. That's why it's so important to recognize any toxic patterns of communication we may also be tolerating from other family members, friends, acquaintances, dating partners, and to set firmer boundaries that honor how we deserve to be treated. Finally, the last step. Ensure that you're in touch with your authentic self. Honor all the facets of your identity that make you who you are. Know that you don't need to hide your true self from others, and that you don't have to follow in your narcissistic father's footsteps in excessively depending upon external validation. Self-validation and connecting with your true self is key on this healing journey. We may not be able to change the narcissistic parent, but we can take steps to ensure that we ourselves are living authentic lives, and we are not modeling the parent's destructive ways of behaving and relating to the world with a false mask ourselves. So that was the first part, and I'm going to move on to the second part in another video.